Albert. You're on my list. Now, last year you will recall that, at least you can hear me, can you not? This voice comes from having coached at the end of the season 50 years in independent school athletics. And during that time I've done a lot of shouting. Some yelling, some complaining, and a lot of congratulatory stuff as well. And last year, you will recall, I wrote and read a piece about my mother, who was quite a musician in her day. And as a matter of fact, I ended that piece with a poem about her, which, by the way, if you walk through the gallery, you'll find that poem, calligraphy, framing here. And if you care to read it, I'd be most appreciative. And next to it is a poem and a photograph about my father, which I'm intended to read tonight, and I'm not going to because of time limitations. My father was a military man, and having graduated from a military college, the oldest private military college in the United States, Norwich University, in the middle of Vermont. And some time ago, I wrote a quite lengthy piece about my father and how, and especially I think his influence over the lives of my twin brother and me had my lives. And I took the memoir out the other day, and there's good news and bad news. The bad news is it's about 55 minutes long. The good news is that I compressed it down to about 14 minutes. So let me get on with it. And as I say to you in this piece called In My Father's House, it would be pointless as well as impossible in this small space to share with you my father's omnipresence in both my brother's and my life in sport, including as it did over time gypsy days of sandlot play and high school athletics, then ultimately the respective challenges of college and military, and even a brief fling at professional sport. How does a son honor that lifetime of influence in just a few sentences? Perhaps it would be better to dwell on a couple of indelible moments, rather than to indulge a survey of generalities about my father's sporting life and how it loomed over mine and my brother's. My identical twin brother is very much a part of this essay. However, having said that, and no matter how I might wish to narrow my memory here tonight, there are some generalities. Because I'm able to recall images of my father in my mind's eye as clearly as if they occurred yesterday. They are animated and indelible, and etched with love and loyalty and clarity and color too. My father comes back to me in GI gyms, emerging from a handball court drenched with sweat and flushed by fatigue. I smell him in the acrid gray smoke of autumn leaves burning and hear his voice in the roar of a far-off football crowd. I see him slumped in the chill of 100 hockey rinks, chain-smoking Chesterfield cigarettes. On Friday nights, he leans forward in an old Morris chair listening to Don Dunphy, bringing Bojack and Rocky Graziano and Sugar Ray Robinson and Tony Zale and LaMotta, and the Brown Bomber himself, Joe Louis, right into our living room, over a rusty antenna wire hitched to a window screen. I think I used that rusty antenna wire last year as well. On Saturday nights, he rises in my memory in the square of a boxing ring at a CCC camp or on a South Pacific island somewhere, moving like Mercury, in khakis, round and round, in and out, back and forth, and then between fighters, holding each at arm's reach, with the shirt sleeves rolled up and half-moons of sweat drenching his underarms. My father comes back to me on skis and skates, and in a collage of playing fields, dank arenas, and smoky gymnasiums, and in the huff and puff of pulling a golf cart around 100 hilly golf courses. And always I sense his presence in water. I was 4 years old when I almost lost my life. Indeed, I thought I had. But it was given back to me by my father, a man of wry wit and eloquent letters, I later learned. But most importantly for me at that precise moment in time, a man of action, home on leave from CCC duty in the American West. My father was a man who valued the art of understatement. Afterwards, for instance, he diminished the horror of the whole experience by saying simply that I had slipped and that he had merely given me a helping hand. But my brother knew better. He told me later that when I stepped outward from dock onto water that I sank like a stone. But I didn't sink immediately because I remember the indelible graphics of jumping again and again in a wet narrowness of space with my eyes only half breaking a chop of waves, blurred flashes of sun, and half a lake away, a single shoreline crowded with trees, and the massive thrust of an old, charred, burnt-out ice house against the hills. It would be an eternity, or so it seemed then in the magnification of childhood memory, before the looming thrust of that black colossus of ice and sawdust would fade, then disappear altogether in the cold, gray mist of my nightmares. And then suddenly there was no shoreline, and no ice house either, as my eyes and mouth filled with water and a frantic, silent calling for my father. My brother had watched in fascination as the lake closed over my head. Not even he remembers how long it took for the first scream to rise in his throat. Perhaps only seconds, perhaps much longer than that. Whichever, I remember clearly my wide-eyed, slow-twisting death spiral toward the bottom of the lake, and then the rising shroud of silt that rose like a powdered cloak around me when my feet touched bottom. And then, magically, I felt my father's presence. I believe to this very day that he had come to the sound of my silent calling instead of my brother's one scream pursuing another. Where had he come from? Probably he had risen from the roof line of the cottage where he sat shingling before launching his lean body high into the afternoon sky. I am certain this is the way it must have been because in the exact instant that his body fell from the sun, I felt the grasp of his strong hand on my shoulder. And then we rose together toward the living, through the swirling silt, the musty smell, the wooden taste, the liquid weight of water, water, water. A day later, in the warmth of the midday sun, my father began to teach my brother and me to swim. Those were the first of our water lessons, and the first trace of my fear of water diminished. But I have never forgotten what my father saved me from more than 7 decades ago, a death by drowning in a place, ironically, that had become as dear to me as dear can be, an ancestral place, an idyllic place, a place of deliverance, my father's place, a place where winter snows and summer rains rest, yet a place where even shallowness can be as deep as oceans and the lake bottom as cold as any stone. The years between 4 and what is now almost 80 dissolved to an afternoon in late August 30 years ago Moments of a father and son walking a small 9-hole country golf course in New Hampshire. The last of our Camelot days of play there together is laced with melancholy and joy. The joy is in the remembering. The melancholy I have tried to forget. We came to the long dogleg 9th even. I had holdover honors, so I took out my trusty 3-wood and teed up a brand new Spalding dot to celebrate the last hole of summer. I turned to look at my father. He was sitting on a small wooden bench at the back of the tee near the edge of the woods next to a ball scrubber. He looked tired and worn and somehow diminished. He was shading his eyes from the sun and looking out across the glare of the pond in front of the tee box and up the hill past an apple tree toward a thrust of woods at the curve of the fairway. I knew that jut of woods well. I had lost more than one ball in its tangle of branches and brambles and pucker bush. I think I'll play it safe and hit it out to the right, away from the woods, I said. Don't, he said softly. It's the last hole. You've got the distance, test yourself. Give yourself something to remember this winter. I peered up the fairway again. I wanted it to look like the 18th at Cherry Hills, or the 9th at Augusta, manicured, cross-mowed, and regal. But in truth, it wasn't even green. It had been a dry summer, and the grass was parched and brown and brittle, and it made a crackling sound when you stepped on it. And you could only imagine the pocked and faded green that lay well beyond the jut of trees. You're on, I said reluctantly. I stuffed my 3-wood back in the bag and hauled out my driver. My takeaway was clean and quick and uncomplicated. There was a long swoosh of air moving, followed by a loud wooden thwack. The dot rocketed across the pond and then began to climb a blue hill of sky toward the woods. It was one of those rare rising shots that lines out low for 100 yards or so and then begins to climb as if some invisible hand from heaven is reeling it in. Somewhere on the far side of the woods, the hand weakened and the ball stalled and fell from sight abruptly beyond the trees. Jesus Christ in the moonlight, my father explained. That was some kind of drive. You want a mulligan on the house? You all know a mulligan is sort of an extra shot that doesn't count. A look might count. Nullify the first one. I'll pass just this once, I said. I thought you might, he said, teeing up his top flight. He wiggled his shoulders in that funny little way he always did and hit a crisp, low shot over the pond and halfway up the hill toward the bend of the fairway. That's my game, he chuckled. Straight down the middle, like Tom Watson, you know. We walked around the pond in silence and then up the hill, the sun warming our backs. As I look back on it, I think my father knew then that this would be the last hole of golf we would ever play together. As it turned out, only he knew then that he was dying. The rest of us would come to know it 3 months later. My father had always been good at keeping secrets. When we reached his top flight, he slipped the 5-iron out of his bag and stood behind his ball, eyeing the thread of woods between his lie and the invisible green beyond. You sure that's enough club, Dad? I said sarcastically. Probably not, he said. But I like the 5-iron. It's like a quarterback, which, by the way, he was. Right in the middle of things, you know. Dad, you're not going to get there with 2 5s, I said. Well, I might get lucky, he said. Besides, in this game, you've got to pay attention to the situation and the terrain. It's an old Army thing, you know. And with that, he hit a perfect line drive shot that hooked around the dogleg and bounced a mile up the hard fairway well beyond the trees. I see what you mean, Dad, I said softly. We found the dot nestled in a short cut of rough by the edge of the fairway just beyond the woods. Wow! That was some shot, my father exclaimed. Got to be 300 yards almost, and uphill too. Well, the hardest part is still ahead, I replied, trying to diminish the compliment. Looks like a 6-iron to me, I said. or maybe a 7. Well, you might want to run it up with a 5 or something, he replied, with a twinkle in his eye. It's hard to hold that elevated green, you know. Right, I said, as I slipped the 7-iron from my bag. Well, the dot had eyes and plenty of spin. It ran out of air somewhere above the flag, dropped lightly from view, and although I could not see it, I knew it would check up and spin back a little toward the hole. Well, I said smugly, I doubt that even your guy Watson could do any better than that. You're only half right, my father replied. My guy Watson could do that all the time. And then he paused and added, every time. I caught the distinction instantly and then the diminishment. We walked up the hill together in silence. When we reached my father's top flight, he stood behind his ball, eyeing the parched stretch of fairway that rose suddenly toward the barely perceptible top of a distant pin and flag. I could sense him calculating the situation and terrain again. And then predictably he reached into his bag and took out his favorite quarterback club and punched another shot that landed far short of the green but bounced along the hard, brittle ground over a couple of mounds, then up an abrupt incline in front of the visible green beyond. We walked slowly up the hill together, he wearily pulling his cart, and I sagging a little under the weight of the golf bag slung across my shoulders. You look like one of those caddies you see on TV, he said. I guess I do at that, I said, but I doubt if any of them would be looking at an eagle right now. Well, I hope you get it, he said. When we reached the green, we found his ball nestled on the edge of a cut of frog hair, with a 50-foot downhill twisting putt staring it in the face. Why don't you hole out, he said. You've only got a short one. Looks like a little left-hand break from here, he added. I eyed the 4-footer apprehensively. Isn't that a gimme? I mumbled. Nothing's a gimme in sport, he replied. You know that. I stood over that ridiculous little twist of a putt for a full minute, perhaps to assuage my fear of missing, perhaps only to stall the end of something, and then backed away to plumb the line again. Pace it through the break, my father said. Just ram it in. But I finessed it. The dot curved toward the hole, then slid past the lip on the low side. My father muttered. It was an old refrain, but it stung. I had blown my eagle. I tapped in and stomped off the green. My father squatted by the edge of the green and surveyed the long, curving line of his putt. Even in the echo of my anger, I could sense him calculating the slip and slide and grain of the green. Lag it up for your par, Dad, I said. Nope, I'm going for the bottom of the hole, he replied. Well, in that case, I'll hold the pin for you, I said. And I did. And it gave me a perfect, humbling view of that 50 feet of green melting in front of his curving top flight as it dove down the hill, running tight and true into the crosshairs of the cup. I was speechless. I had played the hole as well as Nicholas, except for a lack of nerve in the putt, and yet my father, who had bounced his ball all over the course, had birdied too. I could see the irony clearly. We had finished just as we had begun. Even. I bent over and lifted his ball from the cup. That was a great putt, Dad. It was a fitting compliment and the last I ever bestowed on him. Thanks, he said. You deserve better. Should have had your eagle. And that was the end of it, even. On the last of our days at Denbury, the last of everything except the silence and the suffering. He died in my arms the following April, 10 days after his 73rd birthday. When I think of him now, and there's hardly a day that I don't, I remember the curve of that wicked downhill putt and the echoic plop of the top flight as it dropped to the bottom of the cup. A last stroke on that last day of summer, exact and exemplary and final, a perfect metaphorical curve for my father's sporting life and legacy. In that light, and from this point in time, it would be tempting to rhapsodize and speak reverently, or perhaps idyllically, that in his life my father personified all that is good and true, and that he was a giant among men and a warrior athlete like Achilles. The truth is, he was none of that. He was just another man amongst men and a father like any other, who tried his best always to stand tall for his sons and honor his oath to duty and country. In the final analysis, our lives together within that frame contained more sweetness than shadow, more pull than push, and perhaps most importantly, more celebration than either trial or tribulation. That, of course, makes me the celebrant. Thank you very much. You can all be thankful that you were spared the never-ending narrative of that thing goes on and on. Now,